How are we
How you
doing,
doing, my
man?
man?
Good. How are you?
We're good. Yeah, pumped to have you on. So you're the non-CMO at the Solana Foundation. So I guess the place to start is probably just asking what the heck that is and how you approach that role.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's it's become a meme at this point. But when we wanted to rehaul the marketing org, I was initially offered the title of this chief marketing officer, and we always felt a little bit cringe to me because some of our best marketers are actually people who have skin in the game, who are building companies on the network, who are founders, or some of the best marketers are investors. They're maybe angel investors, VCs investing in the application layer on the ecosystem, or perhaps even just the asset itself. And like the foundation is only doing things that the community is unable or unwilling to do, right? And so it's only befitting to sort of acknowledge that and not have a title sort of bestow relevance that is more than it is warranted. So we went back and forth internally, and we're like, "Hey, I kind of like. I think it just doesn't fit well. What we should call it something else." And then eventually, we were like, "Let's just call it what it's not." And we said it's not CMO. And then that eventually became non-CMO. And we said, "Look, everybody who's passionately advocating for the network, whether it's to recruit developers, recruit investors, recruit founders, is the CMO of the network." Right. And I'm just I'm just a peer contributor alongside them, working on things that they are already not working on. And so we want to push down to the community as much as we can and only pick up the pieces where, there's stuff that needs to get done that the community isn't equipped for. And that means the scope of the team and the role changes every 6 months because the community catches up, and then we move to the next frontier. So that's what the context of the role is.
Yeah, I think Lily in her announcement post of you becoming non-CMO said, we're building a marketing engine for the ecosystem, not a marketing team for the Solana Foundation. Yeah. So I guess exactly. I'm curious how do you activate and coordinate this distributed marketing force?
Well, I think what we do is sort of all in public. We have founders, investors, and creators in the network, and depending on sort of what the type of marketing message we want to get out is, there's a cohort of them that help us distribute the message. Now, of course, behind, like, you want to have consistent messaging, you don't want to have chaos, and so there's a lot of, like, you workshop these things in like a private group or in private events where you meet and you talk about what the next epoch of the network looks like, and how can we capture the efforts of everybody on the network within the message that we are seeking to sort of like get out there. And so, as an example, mid last year, it became very clear that we're super infrastructure heavy and we wanted to go all in on apps. And so if you remember, all of Breakpoint 2024 was exclusively about apps, almost to the exclusion of infrastructure in a sort of like somewhat controversial way. But that paid off because then you had a lot of founders and that felt wanted in the ecosystem, that were building apps that felt somewhat unwanted in the rest of crypto. And so we were able to attract all of them. And today, the application revenue is a critical metric you look at to judge the health of a network, right? The health of the network. So, and then it became pretty clear after the election in the US, outcome in the US, that we're going to have the adjacencies of crypto, which is Wall Street, Silicon Valley, and DC, all be interested in crypto. And therefore, whether it's regulators or it's shops on Wall Street, asset issuers, both, or just like asset managers, sell side, buy side, and Silicon Valley, like fintech companies, neobanks, folks like this, will be interested in making this part of their stack. And so we were like, okay, what is the cleanest way we can sort of explain this and articulate this? And so that's how internet capital markets were born. We were like, okay, well, all we're doing is taking an industry and putting it on the internet. This happened with retail. You took Walmart, put it on the internet, it was Amazon, it was $1 trillion outcome. You took Madison Avenue, you put it on the internet, it was $1 trillion outcome. Google Ads, Facebook, etc. You took Hollywood and you put it on the internet, $1 trillion outcome, right? And now we're just taking Wall Street and putting it on the internet. And it's long overdue. It's been held back due to political sort of considerations around regulations. But now politicians have come around to the idea that this is the next frontier, for technology. And so stuff is going to accelerate pretty quickly, because what was holding us back was not really product innovation. It was much more having like a friendly and consultative regime for regulations that we now have the benefit of sort of seeing over the last 8 months or so. So can you imagine another 5 years of this? Things are gonna go vertical.
I think that internet capital markets example is interesting because I imagine there's sort of like the desire from the core of what that means, and then you have sort of the founders, the applications that are being built, and I think the majority of the timeline would think that internet capital markets is more like Believe than it's like Wall Street coming on chain. So I'm curious how. Or you just get comfortable with a lack of control around that message, or is there more to the machine that maybe helps push that towards the broader organizational goals?
Yeah, I mean, look, once it's out in, like, it's like the network, right? Once it's out in the wild, it'll get shaped by the community, and you should be okay to ride the waves and edit it as you see fit in public. We all, I personally always like to clarify that, look, internet capital markets are about reducing it's about two things. You reduce the barriers to asset ownership. So in 5 years from now, if you ever wanted to take Seed Club public, you should just be able to take it public on the internet. You just list online and you fill a few forms, and there's probably some regulator that is looking at those forms, and you just list a token for anybody around the world to buy. So that's like reducing the barrier for asset issuance, right? Because and the reason that's important is because you have 50% fewer public companies today than you did, say, 20 years ago. The cost of going public is pretty high, anywhere between $8 and $30 million, and which means small and medium-sized companies are just not interesting to bankers because they don't make as much money. And so most companies are choosing, and some of the most successful companies like SpaceX and Databricks are choosing to be private. And as a result, all of the gains of the sort of like the American prosperity engine are getting privatized, and you don't have your average American access the capital markets, which was one of the ways they achieved the American dream in the first place, right? And so reducing barriers to asset issuance is kind of important. And then you have barriers to asset ownership, which is all of the stuff that Silicon Valley has been talking about for a while, which is reducing the barriers to accredited investor law. Maybe it's a test. It's not a net worth limit anymore. Anybody with a mobile phone should be able to own assets, right? And today, if you go around the world, like if you wanted a US dollar bank account outside the US, you would have to fill lengthy forms, hope that an overseas bank would bank you and allow you to hold dollars. But now you download a browser extension or a mobile application, which has the icon of a ghost, and you can get US dollars, right? And so that is a fundamental shift in how people are able to access assets. And that's going to happen to everything, stocks, bonds, risk, over time, where the KYC layer will move to the edges of the network, which is issuance and redemption. And anybody will be able to get price exposure to these assets by virtue of being on the network. So that's what internet capital markets are. They're like a massive regime change in how we interact with assets on the internet. And it means, like, you walk into a coffee shop 5 years from now, and then you're like, I love this coffee shop and I want to be a patron. And there's a QR code on the wall. You scan that QR code and you buy a few tokens that entitles you to ownership in the coffee shop, in your neighborhood coffee shop, and you get streamed dividends, right? So it's millions of IPOs. It's billions of investors. So of course, in the short term, there's going to be sort of different projects that interpret it differently, and that's fine. It's just like part of the decentralized nature of the network. You'd rather have that than nobody caring, and then you're like running some corporate marketing campaign that nobody cares about, and everyone's like, oh, that is cringe. Yes, which we also do from time to time. And then the community calls us out.
We reserve the right to do that.
Yeah, so actually the majority of activity on Solana is, or a lot of it is obviously driven by meme coin trading. So I'm curious if you're concerned at all about kind of having a largely degen user base and casino cultures. You look forward to these like big opportunities that are on the horizon.
Yeah. Okay. So the issue with that characterization is that today the assets you're allowed to launch are essentially meme coins, whether you call it by that name or not, right? Mm-hmm. Whether they're governance tokens, whether they're actual meme coins, whatever it is, the assets that are thriving on the network, on any network, are essentially of meme coin-like nature, because the regulations don't allow you to pass on the fruits of the enterprise to the token holders. The day you can pass on revenue to token holders, you're going to bootstrap a new kind of internet organization, which is like a private limited company of the internet era. And we already have that, by the way, right? Like, some point it's going to be a pen stroke, and then you're going to turn on revenues to all the existing projects that have revenues anyway. Today they have forced to do buybacks and all this financial engineering. Tomorrow they're just going to stream dividends. So yeah, with that background in mind, like, what you want the network to have is any asset people that want to trade should be Solana should be the number one venue to trade that asset, whether it's a meme coin, whether it's deep end tokens, whether that's stuff like X stocks, which are like derivative versions of like public stocks or even private stocks. Whatever it is, the highest volume should be on Solana. Just like if you upload a video on the internet, the most number of views you want to get are on YouTube, right? Similarly, the most volume will be on Solana, whatever it is. And today, these are videos of people saying, like early videos of the internet, cat videos, and people doing, sort of selfie style vlogs and stuff like this. Over time, it started inane, right? People were posting pictures of their breakfast on X. And 8 years later, the presidential election outcome had a material result because of X. Similarly, YouTube was like cat videos. And then now it's like every major show, and it flipped. The flippening was when they started, getting more views than broadcast networks. So that's going to happen. It's just a matter of time. So it starts off inane. I think I'm much more optimistic that a regulatory flip will change that. That said, I do think that Solana has, I think, or rather, I admire the culture that Ethereum has in being steadfast and incredibly deeply principled in the way the Ethereum folks think about things and the thoroughness which they think. I think execution is having a level of pragmatism and allowing the network that, if you say is decentralized, to flourish, because you're not going to be able to control the outcome of a decentralized network by definition. You just have to do the best with the hand you're dealt and focus on the good stuff and push hard to incubate the good stuff.
Maybe last question here, and if you can keep it short. I'm sure this is something you'd love to talk about, and maybe we can get into again in the future. But I believe you started Super Team, which I think from the outside, it seems to have been wildly effective at least catalyzing a lot of the organic sort of ground up interest in Solana. I'm curious, is that true? Like, what do you think the impact of that has been, and how important has it been to Solana's growth?
Yeah, so I helped incubate Super Team. We sort of, the reason, again, we didn't have co-founder titles for this because we thought we're co-creating with other team members. And so the way the way it came to be was we were thinking about international expansion at the foundation, and we're like, hey, should we hire head of Germany, head of the UK, head of India, head of Vietnam, and then build out a team within the foundation organization structure? It's subject to all the bureaucracy of a large org, and there's legal considerations and comms and all this stuff. Or should we just let the community build out their own ecosystem, and which is much more crypto native? And we decided to go in the latter way because we figured like you can go much faster. You can go at the maximum speed necessary for that market, not not held back by the organization. And so we found the best community leaders around the world, and they helped onboard developers and founders and investors around in all the countries that Super Team is active in. So to the extent it's been successful, all credit goes to like the members who relentlessly contributed to making Solana a valuable, sort of base to build that community.
Amazing, man. Well, thanks for hopping on with us this morning. Your timeline is very, very worthwhile diving through. I think you have some great hot takes, great responses to some criticism, stuff we didn't even get into here, including the shocking change of tone on the Solana Twitter account, which I thought was a fun one to get into. But we'd love to chat with you again at some point. But thanks for hanging out with us today.
You got it. Thank you, guys.
Cheers.
Peace, man.